Welcome to the Voice of Florida Architecture. I'm your host, Rhonda Hammond, AIA. We are continuing our local component series where we introduce and share how our component leaders are communicating the value architects bring through the built environment within their community and to their membership. In today's episode, we have the leaders of AIA Florida Gulf Coast. Please welcome the current president, Anita Cattell, AIA, President-elect Carl Bernhard, AIA, and the State Director, James Pietchuk, AIA. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. We're happy to be here.
We started the series with our Northwest component up in Pensacola, and now we're moving down along the coast to our Gulf Coast component. Gulf Coast is one of AI Florida's mid-sized components with a rich history of promoting excellence in design and the profession of architecture. Of the 288 licensed architects in your component area, you have 162 members, which gives you a market share of 56%, which is an impressive number for a smaller chapter. The Gulf Coast chapter serves Manatee, Sarasota, Highlands, Hardee, and DeSoto counties. Now, the chapter was chartered in January of 1964, making 2025 your 61st year in existence. That's incredible. So Anita, share with us about your board, the mission it set for itself and how it's made up, and maybe a little bit of your history being on the board.
Sure, of course. So our board has a vision statement that says we will provide stewardship and lead positive change in our community through the power of design. 5 kind of target areas that our board actively seeks to engage are membership and communications, education, advocacy, public outreach, and membership. So those are kind of the 5 pins of our wheel that keep us in rotation. We are an 8-person board. Everyone is volunteers. So we have no active day-to-day employees, although we have a beautiful relationship with AIA Florida and Becky and George. And they help us tremendously with our bookkeeping, all of our goals go through them. And likewise, everything on our social media and website is greatly upheld with their help. So this will be my 2nd year as president here. We had a very big active year last year, but we're walking in right now into our 61st year. Right behind me, I have Carl, who will be coming on next year as our president, and James, who has been likewise a 2-time past president and our current state director. If you guys want to give a little more of your background.
So Carl, share with us, and then what is involved in your role as president-elect.
Sure. Anita, thanks for the introduction. I think that was a great summary of what we try to do. I'm sort of a bit of a newbie, which I can say with pride. Last year, I decided that it was time for me to get involved, and probably a little bit late in my career to do so, but better late than never. I served as, originally I was going to be a chapter director last year just to get started. The vice president-elect wasn't able to continue, and then I was thwarted into the new position of vice president. So like anything in my life, I'd sort of take on challenges head on, and that was certainly one of them. Having James, for example, as one of the board members, somebody that had been a historic part of the AIA Gulf Coast, people like James and Anita, with their experience providing me with guidance as I sort of maneuver this level of the board. So it's been great. So next year is going to be a great year. This year is going to be a great year. And previous one was also great. What an adventure it is to be on the board and to meet such amazing people like the people we have here with us today. Some of the initiatives that I'm taking on this year with the board, obviously there's no real I, but we're doing a lot of hard hat tours, which I think is very important. And it's not just simply going to look at pretty buildings. Really, we want to make sure that there's depth in those tours, that there's an educational component. So every tour that we do hold has a CEU element to it, and is structured in a way that it provides tangible education that can be sort of used in the community. And a lot of those really cater around the need for coastal architecture, resiliency, and the importance of design and how it can have an effect on our communities. So being on the Gulf Coast is such a sensitive place to build. So we really have to work together as a component and as a profession to make sure we're pushing through with best practices. With that, I'll stop talking. I'll let James introduce himself.
Oh, thank you, Carl. That was really great. That brings up a lot of points. I guess I've been in and around the chapter, maybe going back to 1998. That's the first time I can remember getting involved with the design conference. The design conference, along with a few other efforts that the chapter kind of undertook, was probably most responsible for getting me involved in the chapter. I was interested in working with other design professionals, architects, on some of the issues facing the community and say the downtown code, having kind of maybe a level of camaraderie and collegiality to kind of cooperate on these other issues, larger issues that we maybe can't address in our day-to-day office environments or project-focused work. That's kind of what initially drew me to it. It's been a really good experience to have been president of the chapter. Appreciate the opportunity. It's now interesting to see the work that we're doing at state level and being involved in legislative days like I have been. I think it's important for us to defend the profession. I think, from my point of view, we're a little bit under siege from different angles, and that if we don't stick up for ourselves, nobody will. It's important for us to get in front of the legislators and stand up for architecture. Bottom line, it comes down to advocating for architects and architecture in the built environment, and I think might possibly also tip into conservation and preservation as well.
So James, you're the state director for Gulf Coast, which puts you as a state board member. Tell us a little about what the role is of a state director.
The way I look at it is I kind of have one foot in the chapter and one foot in state. And I like to think of myself as the link of the chapter to state. It's kind of a little bit of both. We start to maybe focus on a little bit of the higher issues. I think a lot of my focus has been chapter oriented and just kind of my general approach, but now I can think a little bit more at the state level as well. I really do appreciate and enjoy fellow colleagues from around the state that have to deal with similar issues, but maybe in a little different way or a different context, or there's a little difference in the way that problems are approached or the kind of problems that we're faced with. So I think that's really interesting, and by getting together and trying to work on these things, it's a fruitful and productive effort.
Thank you. Absolutely. So the state director, each component has one on the board, and you absolutely are the liaison between the state and your local component, keeping them informed. So Carl, coming back to the component level, you're going into your 61st year, as Anita mentioned. What are some of the activities that you guys have planned to celebrate that?
That's a good question, and I love how you're saying celebrate the 61st year. So what it implies is that we should be celebrating every year
Yes.
that we continue moving forward, right?
We are thrilled to have just launched our 61st year anniversary logo that is now live and active on the website. So that is a big celebration you can anticipate in the years that come. So we are grateful to our graphics team for that. We are going to hold our first design drinks of the year. So that will be our first social gathering where we can celebrate as a group and recap. It's been a little rush coming back from legislative day. So we will celebrate the 61st anniversary. And we're going to a brand new restaurant. So I hope it's well attended.
We'll say that with Anita at the helm, we held to celebrate our 60th year. We had our annual dinner, and it was sort of a record-breaking attendance. I think we had to change the occupancy load of the building we were in, and so that was quite an event. So we did do it right for our 60th year.
Sadly, we were rescheduled from the hurricanes, but we were able to get everyone to be super accommodating and flexible. We got it rescheduled 2 weeks later from our original date, exceeded capacity of the first registration, filled the room with 120 people, had some students come from FAMU, professors from Arizona State, and we just had a wonderful time. Carl Abbott was in the room. Yeah, we got him there. We had Steve Panzerino, so it was a great time, very well attended from everyone in our local chapter. It was great.
And doing my homework for this discussion this morning, I spent some time on your website, and you guys have put a lot of effort into that, and that it focuses on non-members, it focuses on members at different stages. It's great content. What I found unique is that Gulf Coast celebrates its members. You list your fellows, you list your citizen architects, ranks and you recognize the individual achievements. And I think that is wonderful. So James, share with us some of your more influential members that hail from AIA Florida Gulf Coast.
A lot of it will stem from the Sarasota School of Architecture. That's a lot of what we stand on to a certain degree, the shoulders of that period of time and those practitioners, those architects, and the work that they did and the example that they set, the quality of work that they were able to achieve. But I think Carl Abbott obviously came out of that and studied under Paul Rudolph, and I believe Guy Peterson as well, out of that tradition as well. But as far as the chapter is concerned and activity and events, I think Mark Smith is probably the one that comes most to mind in his interest in the community, interest in having a voice and trying to bring the perspective of an architect to the issues of the community. And in his particular case, specifically Siesta Key. But he also took over the reins of the design conference early on, which was something that caught my eye. And the idea to have an event specifically about design and kind of quality and excellence. And I think to a certain degree, things we can hopefully all relate to. It's very nice to be able to kind of recharge our batteries and our design sensibilities. Kind of more recently, Steve Panzerino has been a great asset. He's been active in the chapter and active at state level, and now we have him on strategic council at national, and is a tremendous resource. And he has a very good understanding of the issues and a very broad perspective, and I think essentially a constructive attitude toward building the profession and building the institute or the organization and the chapter and state and improving them and strengthening them.
He was the state president in 2020, which was a totally interesting year when everything went remote. But he had that strong, calming voice that we needed in all the crazy times that were going on around the country and in with the state. So let's talk about the Gulf Coast, the component that you've won the AIA Florida Anthony Tony Pillar Chapter Award 3 different years, as far back as 1965 and 2005, and just last year in 2024. Congratulations. I'd like to remind our listeners that the Pillara Chapter Award honors the component that strives to exceed core member services and its members' expectations, particularly in the area of public awareness and outreach, political effectiveness, and membership development. Tell us how this component has continually exceeded in these areas.
Yeah, thank you. We were thrilled to receive that award last year. That was a great time to celebrate with our board members and all of our group together. But so I think a few items that stand out for us related to that award, our membership, we have a full calendar. We have started becoming a lot more organized in our calendar and our programming. So we have established a large event calendar that includes at least 6 design drinks a year. We're aiming for 6 or more hard hat tours a year. We are fully committed to education. So we offer 24 annual CEUs within our chapter. I think the minimum requirement that we hold is 12. So we have doubled down and are offering the ability to have 24 presented by the chapter. Likewise, a big highlight for our chapter is the Sarasota Design Conference. One thing that I think is very interesting with our programming in particular is because we are a small chapter, but we are rooted in history and architectural excellence, there's a very natural pairing of our mission statement with Architecture Sarasota, which is an independent organization, a nonprofit in this town that is dedicated to preserving the history of excellence in this community, more in terms of actual building. So a lot of their programming, which is based on history and also the future of Sarasota, pairs so naturally with our mission to provide stewardship and connections in our community. So there's just a natural alliance there. We're so happy to share this space with them, and they've been a great asset to us.
Tell us about the Sarasota Design Conference. That is a premier event, and the reputation precedes you. So tell us about that event.
Yeah, so I believe the first year was 2014. We just had the most recent one in 2024 in March. It was a beautiful event. We had 5 speakers come both internationally and nationally. of firms from all sizes, as large as Renzo Piano and as small as sole practitioners and or collegiate professors. So it was a beautiful range of scales. That was the first time in 2 years. So it is a biannual conference, and we are looking again to do that in 2026. Very likely after the AIA Florida convention happens, we'll kind of group and gather for our March 2026 mission.
So is this conference, do you collaborate with the school there?
We do not. We have an internal committee, so we'll get a committee together that is assigned to be part of the selection group of what the topic is, what the theme is, who the speakers are. The location has become very important. Last year we were able to hold it at the Ringling Art Museum. They had a lecture hall on the second space of a building that Sweet Sparkman designed, so it was a beautiful location. But we're kind of adapting every year. We've also held it at the Sarasota Art Museum. It's really just a good place to explore Sarasota in terms of spaces as well. The Ringling Museum was really well received as the location for that event because it blended art and architecture. There was a natural inclination for people to wander the museum and the property while they were on campus, and some people had just never been there before. So we love that there was that cross-pollination for the event.
I think that really the beauty of this is that it's strictly a design conference. And that is the sole purpose of the event, is to discuss architecture and design, and trying to sort of pull in architects and ideas from all over the world. And I think we're lucky in the environment that we live in that we can attract such, some star architects in ways. And it's not only, it's because of the rich history of the architecture of Sarasota, it's natural for some of these, higher profile names to come to our city and share their stories. It's a great thing.
It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. But just to go back, the design conference actually started in like 1988.
What do you think the significance of the conference is?
Well, I kind of touched on it earlier, and I think Carl touched on it as well. It is wonderful to have this legacy to draw upon and a history of attendees, past presenters that then potential presenters and speakers take into account and very graciously help us to keep it going. And we really do appreciate the assistance of the facilities, the different organizations, or various organizations around town that we've been able to partner with. I do agree, the Sarasota Art Museum was great. Ringling was great. Just, not only the architecture and the art, but the natural setting as well.
Anita has mentioned, and you just mentioned a couple of the spaces and buildings. What are some of the other pieces of architecture that make Sarasota?
Oh, we have so many to choose from. I will kick this off with probably an easy one, but I think for me, the Umbrella House is just very iconic. I feel very connected to that project. I worked for one of the architects that has also been involved in the renovation of putting the umbrella back on after it was, again, our community always hit by hurricanes. The beautiful umbrella of the house was removed in a hurricane, and years later put back on with a beautiful delicacy of trying to restore and preserve the original intention that I think really speaks to our local school and the vernacular. So that's my personal pick.
I'll give you my personal pick, and it's kind of personal in a couple ways. I'm a huge fan of Victor Lundy's work. I think he's a poet in physical form that he creates. The St. Paul's Lutheran Church, sort of near and dear to me. Sort of beautiful swooping roof, minimal form, and the interior of it is so beautiful. The way that it's structured, with the roof is actually held with tension cables, which is just such a brilliant way of doing structure. My son, when we first moved here to Sarasota from New Orleans, he was 7 months old, and the first school he ever attended was the VPK at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. So as most of us architects like to do, we sort of inject our children into architecture whether they like it or not. So I started him before he could really speak to in a Lundy building.
Mr. Lundy was awarded the Medal of Honor of Design last year at our convention. So he very much has an impact on this area and its architect. James, do you have a favorite piece?
Two examples, one being the old Riverview High School that we no longer have, which I attended and members of my family attended.
I was the last year that got to attend the original campus.
There you go. So that's one we've lost. And I think if we go back and look at the historic original photos of it, it's truly amazing. And it's a shame that we weren't able to save it. The other end of the spectrum, I would say something like along the lines of the Lou Andrews house, I think in Tropical Shores area. I think she was an assistant to Paul Rudolph, I think, or something along those lines. And it's just a beautiful, sensitively done, kind of micro scale Sarasota school, Ocala block, beautiful wood trim and wood structural elements that we have a number of examples around the area. And I think that's just kind of a beautiful example of the kind of micro attention to detail or architecture, texture, materiality, things like that.
You guys have such a rich history, and I know that we've only scratched the surface here. But after the Sarasota Design Conference, are there any other events that you guys would like to highlight?
Last year, we also had our design awards ceremony. That was actually the closing ceremony of our design conference. That had been the first time in 4 years that we had held that event. So that was also record breaking. We had 84 submissions from architects within our community across 7 categories, ranging from single family homes, renovations, additions, interiors, and go on and on. 12 awards were given out. 2 were for honor and 10 were for merit. And this year, the group of judges that were so kind and gracious to review all 84 of those submissions were from Kansas. The lead speaker of the Sarasota Design Conference was on the AIA board in Kansas City. So Kansas City was our reviewing. They had a fierce amount of competition in that group, and we were so grateful. James Pfeiffer was still in the room at the night that we held the ceremony, and he was able to give firsthand feedback to all of the winners that I think was really, really well received. He gave them his handwritten notes of things that everyone that had reviewed their submissions had to say for all of the winners. And it was, again, record breaking, maxed out the capacity of that room as well. But we are looking to hold that event in October of this year. Probably it looks like later in October to just get us out of hurricane season. We'll be a little more ready to predict. So please look forward to that on the calendars. We will have information coming out soon as the committee members get moving.
I do also want to mention we're doing a sort of a flagship or experimental event that I had been a part of back in New Orleans, which is sort of getting the community involved and creating art pieces associated with design. So we're looking at holding an architecture through art event, a gala and silent auction, where we have submissions from local architects, artists, could be engineers, people that want to submit a piece that sort of represents how architecture and design can inspire spaces. What we would do is we would display those at a gala one night, and there would be a silent auction, and all the proceeds of that would go to a selected charity of choice or an initiative that sort of help the community. We're looking to do that sort of toward the end of the first half of the year. That's going to be something new for us to do, and I think it'll be a great event.
So in my research, there was something that was mentioned, a 10 by 10. What is that event?
See, that was something, James Bowen is somebody that kind of came to mind. I think he was active in the early 2000s, and he had a particular amount of energy as far as putting on events. And one of the things that he did come up with was the 10 by 10. And I was in the very first one, I think, 2001 or 2004, I can't remember. 10 architects would come up with 10 slides of images of things that provided them inspiration graphically or photographically. Wasn't necessarily supposed to be our own work or necessarily a marketing effort. It was really meant to be about design. And it's gone through a number of iterations and different versions and evolutions since then. And Michael Hofflantz has picked it up, goodness, for the last 10 or 15 years. I'm not really sure. He's taken it, by and large, continuing the tradition. Has a lot of interesting people to come to bear on different issues, and knows many artists and designers and architects and members of the community as well. It's also interesting to get city commissioners or county commissioners who may have different interests and hobbies or pastimes, what have you, that do kind of cross over. And it makes for sometimes a very interesting evening to kind of interact with people in different fields, different professions, things like that.
We have this event. We are now doing it 3 times a year. So we do have 2 more on the calendar for the rest of this year. I think one is April 3rd, and then the finale will be in September, I think September 25th. And those have been held at the Sarasota Art Museum as of recently. And again, we are maxing out the capacity of that room. So if you have any interest in attending, they're very well attended. We're getting upwards of 200 people. And as James said, the crowd is honestly getting more and more diverse every time you show up. Michael Hofflans has done a really beautiful job of blending his connections at USF. He's also paired with a professor at Ringling College of Design. So that's where we're starting to see this kind of really beautiful and organic growing beyond the architecture community. We have artists. I think there's been a clown as of recently, a lot of painters. It's become a great place to see Sarasota in a different limelight.
Nice. It sounds like fun. So, like many of our components around the state, Gulf Coast membership have felt the full brunt of devastation from recent hurricanes. Share how Gulf Coast prepares and responds to the aftermath of these events.
As far as prepares, that's a good question. I don't know if we have a plan to prepare in place other than just being Floridians and trying to stay above water. Shortly after the storms, news started coming in of the damage and the different, there was a lot of devastation, widespread devastation, a lot of flooding, a lot more flooding than I think I expected. And I think that a lot of people expected that, they didn't believe they were even in flood zone. So there's just a lot to unpack there. And how can we help? We sort of threw the idea around of setting up our own fundraising efforts, but we thought that, the most efficient way to do it would be to select some already established organizations and sort of promote their efforts. So we're advertising for the Salvation Army, United Way of Sarasota, the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, and then the Community Foundation of Sarasota, which all have sort of separate initiatives. So there's a variety there between helping families find places temporarily to live or helping them to understand what comes next. We also have been working with Architecture Sarasota. They've set up their own initiative called Restoring a Sense of Place, which is really sort of focusing a bit more on sort of preservation of the Sarasota school structures. The Sanderling pavilions that Paul Rudolph designed were completely obliterated. There's nothing left but wreckage of those. And one thing that Architecture Sarasota brought to light that is very important is how we can better be proactive for these situations and document and record existing conditions before the disaster. So local architects, my firm is also helping with this, have used their 3D scanners and different surveying tools to record and document existing structures so that in the event that there are damages, that we have a better way of storing them or at least keeping that legacy in some form. So I think that's an important one. I'm actually really excited about the Elevate Florida initiative that has finally been opened up to the public, which I think is amazing. Coming from New Orleans and living through Katrina, and the importance of getting assistance to mitigate existing structures. So with this initiative, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for our citizens to be able to build back better and stronger and in a more resilient manner so that the next way around, they'll be better prepared. And AIA Gulf Coast chapter should start looking and seeing how we can engage with that program and better advise our citizens in that process.
No, those are great points. Likewise, I would like to mention Julian Norman Webb is from our chapter, and he sits on the AIA Florida Resiliency Committee. So we're so happy to have him represent literally our voice from this community at the state level. I just heard from him that they have released an appendix to the Florida Building Code related exactly to the realm of resiliency. So that will be non-binding in its inception in the building code, but it will be there as a guideline to build better. We're very happy to have a voice at that table that's policy driven as well.
Julian is also on the state board, just like James, but he's one of our vice presidents right now of resiliency, and he's championed that appendices. Another great member from your component. On your website, you have a page dedicated to why an AIA architect This was a new feature for me. Share why it's important to make this commitment with our listeners.
Point is to stress why it's important to engage with an architect and what value we bring to the table. And I don't think the message is kind of out there. There are people sensationalize the word architect. It's sort of a glamorous name up there with doctors and things, but I don't know if the general public has as good an understanding of what value we bring. So part of that and part of our responsibility is to spread that word and to be out there. And I think being part of this community with the AIA allows us that platform to do it.
Being an architect is defined by the state. It's professionally regulated by the state. We're entrusted with the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, of our inhabitants, and we don't necessarily take it lightly. Being a part of the AIA is an opportunity to join together on some of these larger issues that we deal with every day, but potentially cannot directly address through our individual projects or day-to-day work. And I think the value of a professionally educated and trained architect hopefully speaks for itself to a certain extent. And our role and our duty is to demonstrate that to the lay public, to the general public, that it is in their best interest, quality-wise and possibly long-term financially, to work with architects. Architects that are a member of the AIA also bring a certain amount of community involvement or professional kind of understanding and a level of professionalism, hope, that can be counted on to benefit their project in the long run.
So is there anything else that you'd like to showcase about your component for our listeners?
So there is quite a bit of a history at the chapter level, also with our preservation efforts. We have a lot of historical societies, preservation-oriented organizations. We do like working whether it's Architecture Sarasota, the Alliance for Historic Preservation, I think, SAHP, and they're good organizations and they do good work. But I would also like for architects to be recognized for their understanding of the ordinances and the incentives and process and Secretary of Interior standards, et cetera. I'd also like to thank our allied members and our sponsors. That's one of the things we've really tried to improve and build on is getting other members of the industry, whether it be our consultants, our engineers, and maybe people interested in architecture, or whether they're manufacturers, reps, local businesses in the construction industry. We really appreciate their support, and we've really tried to bring them into the fold. Maybe Anita can touch on that a little bit further.
Rhonda, I do have three items that I think make this chapter so special. Again, we are very few in number. We're barely crossing 200. But I love to say we are small but mighty. Our board is very passionate. We have a great amount of mentorship, both on the board currently and outside the board. We've actually tapped into our past presidents, and we've established a committee of elders that are helping both Carl and I, being very new to this process, understand the roots of what our chapter values, why things were put in place, and they keep us historically in check as we look to the future with new ideas and new initiatives. Three things that we've really been focusing on in particular is valuable programming. We are very serious to our commitment of education and providing valuable resources to mentors, allies, students. And that really means that we understand everyone is very, very busy. We don't want them to ever show up and feel like they wasted any moment of their time. So we are very selective in our CEU programming, our hard hat tours. Everything is getting vetted to make sure that we're maintaining a level of excellence that our membership can rely on. Likewise, we've also been very focused on finding connections. There are so many people in our chapter with so many passions. It's been really beautiful to open up our programming at events like the 10 by 10s. Our design drinks are also having record-breaking attendance. We are getting different people with different backgrounds, with different opinions, all in the room, collaborating and connecting together in various formats, whether that be more social, more educational, or everything there in between. So we really want to find a connection so everyone feels that their voice is heard, and make sure we're providing programming specific to all of those different interests so nobody feels excluded. We want everyone to feel really embraced and valued in our chapter. And last, again, really a benefit for a group as small as us in number is to embrace the shared mission that we have going with Architecture Sarasota. I am curious, out of all the chapters in the state, but we have so many calendar events coming up, and many of those are thankful to their programming, their staffing. But that shared alliance of what we value has really been a beautiful blessing in the last few years that we hope to see in the years that come.
Thank you. So Carl and James and Anita, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your commitment to the profession of architecture and all you do to promote that. AIA Florida Gulf Coast, as you can see, is an active component with a full calendar of member-focused programming and premier events that celebrate the excellence in design. For more information, you can go to their website. As I've mentioned, it's at aiagulfcoast.org. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
So just a reminder that our Design and Honor Awards registration closes on March 10th. And I have to say that AIA Florida Gulf Coast members have continually been recognized for their work and service there. So there's a challenge for everybody. Thank you for listening. We welcome you to stay tuned as we continue our component series and introduce the members of our Board of Architecture and Interior Design. You can find us wherever you stream your podcast. This is Rhonda Hammond, AIA, your host, and thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice of Florida Architecture.